Okay, so welcome to another Birmingham Wheelchair Basketball Motivation and Inspiration interview. Tonight, we've got the great pleasure of interviewing Brittani Coury, US Team USA snowboarder, Paralympic snowboarder. Brittani, it's a pleasure to chat with you. Obviously, you know, you're a silver medalist from the 2018 Paralympics, Winter Paralympics, sorry. And you know, it's such a pleasure. We've done so many interviews, and you know, to have somebody like yourself again, you know, being part of our motivation, inspiration, it's such a pleasure. So, Owen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, it's Owen Lamprey, lead practitioner for health and wellbeing at Clifton Primary School in Birmingham, and linked to various basketball and other sporting organisations across Birmingham. Absolute pleasure to meet you.
Thanks, Owen. So, Brittani, over to you. I mean, you know, please enlighten us with your story about how it all began.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm really excited. Inspiration, we all need that, and motivation, you know, who doesn't need a little bit of that in their life? Yeah, so I'm Brittani Coury. I'm on the US Paralympic snowboard team. How I became Paralympian is kind of unconventional, I guess you could say. So I loved snowboarding from the time I first put a snowboard on my feet. I was able-bodied at that time, and I had a pretty troubled youth, and I had a lot of insecurities. I had a lot of poor self-esteem. I had a lot of feelings of being inept and inadequate and not loved. And snowboarding for me, it filled a lot of those voids when I was out in the mountains. And it was my place where I felt like I could fit in, I could be free, and I could just put a board on my feet and just, you know, kind of escape the world. I tell people snowboarding was kind of like my drug of choice, because it covered up a lot of, like I said, a lot of negative emotions. With that being said, you know, I hurt myself when I was about 17. I had put all my gear together, picked and pieced it, you know, from here to this person or that person. And my boots were way too big. I had a size 8 at the time. I wear a size 5 snowboard boot now. And I had done what's called tomahawking, which is kind of head over feet, you know, as you go down the hill. And the forces tried to pull my right foot out of the boot, but it only made it about halfway as I continued to tomahawk down the mountain. And I knew something was wrong immediately because I felt a great deal of pain. And my first reaction was I told my buddy to get my boots off because I didn't want ski patrol to cut them off because I didn't have the funding to buy more boots, you know. And so they ended up taking me down. I refused to go to the clinic, and my friend just took me home. Little did I know that this accident on Christmas Eve would ultimately end in my decision to amputate at 25 years old. So about 8 years of pain, crazy amounts of pain. But I turned 18 and I started teaching snowboarding, and I was on snow over 100 days a season with a mangled ankle, just, you know, getting as much of my drug of choice in as I could each winter, and I ended up just completely trashing my ankle. And so when I was 21, my foot was so big that I could no longer physically stuff it into my snowboarding boot. And that's when I knew that I needed to get some help and maybe see a doctor. They did a surgery at 21 at the beginning of the summer. And by the end of the summer, they wanted to fuse my ankle, which meant I could no longer do any high impact activity without the risk of blowing my knee, my back, my hip, anything further up out. And so at this point I said, no way. And I moved to Mammoth, California, because in Trans World Snowboard magazine, Mammoth was always the highlighted mountain because they had the best parks in the US. And so I went on my new adventure because, you know, I had seen Mammoth and it was this amazing place in my mind. And so I ended up getting 110 days on snow that season and just completely demolished my ankle even further. I went to a boot fitter and they ended up cutting out the liner of my boot so my ankle would fit so that I could still snowboard. And I saw a doctor in Mammoth, and he said he's seen climbers fall from considerable heights and their ankle joint didn't look like mine. And I was still working as a snowboard instructor, snowboarding every single day, working another job and hitting 40 to 60 foot jumps every single day, a 20-foot half pipe, boxes, rails, you name it. Like I was out there just, living my best life. And so he had recommended that I see a foot and ankle trauma specialist. So I went back home and I saw a specialist in Golden, Colorado. And he said, I told him that they wanted to fuse my ankle. And he's like, oh no, that's for an elderly person that just wants to go get their mail. We'll get your ankle fixed. At this point, I was 22 and a half, and I had 8 ankle surgeries from 22 and a half to 25. This is the period where I felt the most disabled. My car was a standard. I couldn't drive. I was on crutches basically for 3 years straight. And I definitely felt disabled at this point. And so towards the end of all of my surgeries, I knew that there was no way that my ankle was going to be fixable. The only way I could get around in between surgeries was the Skechers Shape Up shoes that had like a rocker on the bottom, because I didn't have to use my ankle joint. I could just use the shoe to kind of help get me around. And I was living with a nurse at this point in Durango, and she kind of adopted me as a grandchild. And she's like, Brittany, you're not going to be able to snowboard anymore. Why don't you do something with your life? Why don't you go to school and get an education so that you can do something? Because, become a physical therapy assistant, because I had been in therapy for so long. But that sounded boring to me. So I looked at other avenues, and EMS, or emergency medical technician, I'm like, oh, I could get adrenaline and I could be ski patrol, once my ankle gets fixed, in denial that I wouldn't, be able to snowboard again. And so in January of 2011, I started taking an EMT basic class on crutches in the snow. I had to crutch to the bus stop, get on the bus, crutch from the bus stop to the school. And I kind of fell in love with medicine at this point. I really wanted to be a Flight for Life paramedic because I enjoyed, I was a pretty bad student. I hated high school. I didn't go. I missed 58 days my senior year. It wasn't a place where I enjoyed being. But with college, it was a little different because I could dictate what classes I took and kind of where I went. And nobody really had told me that I was smart enough to go to college, or I had that value or worth to do that. And I'm very grateful for Vicki instilling that confidence in me to inspire me to want to go to school, because that was something that I never wanted to get a college degree. And so I got my EMT basic, and I couldn't even do the clinicals. So you have to do some at the fire department and some in the emergency room. And they had to cut my clinicals into hour-long rotations because I couldn't be on my feet. And I mean, this was kind of a moment of clarity for me. I'm like, now I have this certificate. I can't even get in and out of an ambulance. I can't be on my feet. I'm not able to snowboard. There was a lot of limiting factors. And so I started looking back into fusion. And once again, I was like, this is not going to be good for me. It's not going to be conducive for my lifestyle. So then I started looking at different approaches, which ended up looking at amputation and seeing what other people were able to do as amputees. And I pulled up a YouTube video of a guy downhill mountain biking with a prosthetic. And I was like, sign me up. This is what I want to do. I'm ready to get my mobility back. I'm ready to get back out there and live my life. I had lost a huge chunk of my youth being on crutches and all of that. And so, I told my sister, I'm like, hey, I'm going to amputate my foot. And she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, if you go up there and say you want to amputate, she's like, your doctor's going to put you in a loony bin. She's like, nobody's going to amputate your foot. And so then I was trying to get my brother-in-law, we were trying to figure out different ways where we could make it look like an accident in case they weren't going to amputate it for me. And so one of the big things was nerve pain. So I was trying to figure out the best way to get rid of it without being in a lot of nerve pain. But I had a visit with my doctor, and, at that point he's like, I can't, he's like, your foot is like trying to put a square peg into a round hole, was the verbiage that he used. And he said, we're going to have to fuse it. And I looked at him and I said, that's messed up. I came here several years ago and you told me that a fusion was for an elderly person. And now you're going to sit here and say this is the last option. I said, that's not right. I'm not willing to do that. And so he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to amputate. I want to be active. I can handle pain. I can't handle not being able to do the activities that I want to do. And so he was kind of a little bit thrown back, but I think he understood where I came from, and we were pretty close friends. And so he had told me if I saw a couple other doctors, he would amputate. One was a total ankle specialist, but they wouldn't even make me an appointment because I was too young and it wouldn't last my lifetime. The other one was a bone graft specialist. And he said that he would have to replace my whole talus, which is my ankle joint, and my whole tibial head, which is the bone that goes into the joint. And he said it's too much bone grafting. It's basically experimental at that point, and he couldn't help me. And then the other person I saw was my prosthetist, who makes the sockets and all the stuff for amputees. He's still my prosthetist now, but I saw my doctor initially on May 5th, and I amputated on June 29th. And for this, I chose not to tell anybody I was amputating. I told my immediate family and a couple friends because I didn't want other people's opinions or thoughts to be in my head when I was going in to have the procedure. I felt like this was my decision, this was my choice. And if the outcome was negative, I didn't want to have regrets thinking about I should have listened to so-and-so who said I shouldn't have done it. I had made up my mind. That's what I was going to do. And, my family really struggled with the decision, and they weren't very supportive of the amputation. And so it was a weird role for me to play because I had to be their cheerleader and their amp person telling them that I'm going to be okay and it's going to be all right. And I remember, I had the same pre-op nurses every single time I had surgery. Their names were Fran and JJ. And, every time I came for surgery, they're like, oh my gosh, you're back again. So last time you were talking about business socks or Flight of the Conchords or flying in Alaska, they're like, and now they were a little bit in shock that I was getting my leg amputated. And I had shared with them that I wanted to be a Flight for Life paramedic. And so when I was done, I was in the post anesthesia unit, and Fran and JJ ended up having the Flight for Life team come and pick me up. And that's who took me to the room where I was staying. I still get goosebumps to this day every time I say that, because that was a huge impact and a pivotal moment in my life, because I realized that I loved emergency medical, being an EMT, but I could have a huge impact as a nurse because I knew what people were going through. And if I could be somebody's Fran or JJ and make their day a little bit better, I felt like that was kind of my new life purpose, was to help other people and inspire them the same way that they did. Because those little small things like that, it made a huge impact in my life. And so after amputation, I kind of stepped away from snowboarding and decided to get my degree as a nurse. Snowboarding was still always in the back of my mind. I watched the Sochi Paralympics when snowboarding made its debut. I was doing nursing prereqs at the time. I didn't have a car. I was, trying to make it work. And I remember just watching and being like, I know I could do that. I know that I could do that. I didn't have the means or anything at that moment, but I knew that I could. And so I ended up moving back closer to home to do nursing school. And I have two nieces and a nephew, and we were never a winter family. We weren't on the ski team or anything like that. My mom hated the winter. That's all we heard all winter long, was how much she hated the cold. And so I wanted my nieces and nephews to enjoy all of the seasons, including winter. And so we would go skiing. The first time I went snowboarding, without a foot, it was kind of interesting, and it was with those kids. And I remember my middle niece, we were on the chairlift, and she looked at me and she's like, I think it's really cool that you can still snowboard, without a foot. And it was a really cool moment because I was able to share with her, I'm the only one that can limit myself on what I'm able to do and not able to do. if you want to do something and you put your mind to it, you can do whatever you want to do. And it was like that moment. I still remember the chair. I don't remember the number of the chair, but I just remember that moment and how special it was. Little did I know that, you know, a little over a year later, I would be standing on top of a podium in Korea. But after I graduated nursing school in May of 2016, I got a job as a supervisor at the clinic I was working in, and snowboarding was still back there in my mind. And I just remembered, you know, replaying the Paralympics. And I told myself, I was 30 years old at this point, and I said, I'm going to do one race. And if I do one race and I fail epically, then at least I can say I've done it. But if I never do a race, then I'm always going to live the rest of my life with regret, knowing that this was something that I could do. And so I started looking in the States and trying to figure out how to get involved with Paralympic snowboarding or how to find a race to go to. And my prosthetist had given me an email before Sochi. And I emailed this person, and he ended up getting back with me, and he's the one who organizes the adaptive dew tour event. So he called me on Monday, the beginning part of December, and said if I could get to Breckenridge, Colorado, which was about 6 hours away, they could evaluate on Wednesday, they could evaluate my riding on Thursday, and I could possibly compete in dew tour on Friday. And I was like, holy smokes, like this is crazy. Cause like dew tour is a big thing. Like it's a huge thing for extreme sports. So I was like on cloud nine. I'm like, oh, and he's like, well, how good are you? And I'm like, well, I've only been on snow as an amputee for 12 days. I said, but I can keep up with like a 7, a 10, and a 12-year-old. Like, I feel like I'm pretty all right. You know, I can make it from the top to the bottom. And so I guess they had looked into my Facebook profile, and they saw me on a downhill bike jumping, you know, gapping and all that stuff. And so I got there. They evaluated my riding on Thursday, and they told me that I could snowboard, I could race. And so I was just so happy to be there. Like it was one of the coolest things ever. And I had been an amputee for 5 years at this point, and I hadn't met another amputee. And so dew tour, I was surrounded by people who had limb differences, cerebral palsy, amputations, and it was really cool because I was able to listen to a lot of people's stories and just see other people and what they were able to do. And it was just really neat. And I ended up finishing second to last, and I think that was the most celebrated second to last finish in sporting event history, because I was like, yes, I'm not last, you know, like I didn't finish on the bottom. That's super cool, you know. And I had my stuff from my 10-year-old snowboard that had no edges on it because I did park before. I looked like a big, huge gorilla, a red one, because all my clothes were big and baggy because that was the style in the early 2000s. And you know, everybody's in their race suits with their race boards, and I'm here on a 140 snowboard, which is tiny. And I remember the U.S. coaches, they're like, who are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm Brittany, what's up? You know, it was my 14th day on snow. And they're like, holy smokes. They're like, 14 days? I'm like, yeah, you know, I snowboarded before. And they're like, we want to see you at more events. Like, there's a World Cup coming up in January. We would love to see you there. And I was like starstruck that the U.S. coaches were even talking to me, more or less telling me that they'd like to see me again. And so I had met a guy named Kep there, and he wanted to ride with me after the event. Sorry, my head. And so we went up and rode, and he got a little bit of my backstory, and he's like, hey, I'm in Crested Butte. If you want to come up and ride, let's ride. And so I met with him after dew tour and went and rode. And I'm like, you know, I was a supervisor of a clinic at this point. I was working over 60, 70 hours a week. I had a really good paying job. I love snowboarding, you know, and I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, I'm not going to blow smoke. Like, if you dedicated yourself, he's like, you could like make the US team. And so I was like, all right, let's do it. So I ordered snowboards, and my local shops gave me some pants and a smaller, slimmer fitting jacket, so I didn't look like a gorilla anymore. And I did that race it was in Lake Tahoe, but I ended up tearing my calf muscle in my amputated leg unknowingly. I still raced, but I was in a lot of pain, and I ended up getting second in 2 World Cup border cross races, my first border cross race ever. And so once again, the U.S. coaches were like, who is this girl? Like, oh, I ended up catching an edge and busting my goggle lenses out of my face right in front of the coaches, but I got up and kept going, you know. And so I was supposed to go to Spain, but I had found out that I tore my muscle, so I wasn't able to go. And I'm like, man, darn, this stinks, you know. And then I got an email from Pat saying that they wanted to invite me to Korea for the Paralympic test event. And so I was one of 4 athletes that were on the national team at that point to go. And I'm like, I have to do this. This is cool, you know. So I ended up taking my work computer. They told me if I finished 4th in border cross and bank slalom, they'd bring me on the U.S. team. And I finished last in border cross and bank slalom. It took me almost an hour to drop into the border cross course because it wasn't crazy looking, and I literally thought I was going to die. I just kept like going to the edge and coming back, and finally the wax tech is like, you have to do it. Like, he's like, you can't just sit here and look at it. You have to try. So I did. I mean, I didn't do very well and went home, and the last event of the year is nationals, and I wasn't going to go because I was pretty disheartened because I didn't, you know, I finished last. But my boss said she had given me the time off and that I needed to go. Well, I ended up going down in a practice run and my knee was hurting, but I still raced and I still got first in my category. But the second day I couldn't even walk. My leg hurt so bad. And I thought I had blown my knee out, and possibly thought I blew my knee out. I could kind of still walk, but I went home, went to work for 2 days, and I just couldn't hardly walk. So I went and got it checked out, and it happened that I had fractured my femoral condyle on my amputated leg. So I had to do 12 weeks on crutches without my leg. And so I was super bummed. I was like, man, I didn't make the U.S. team. Now I'm back on crutches. I can't work. Like, I was in a pretty, not a bad space, but just kind of bummed. And I remember like saying a little prayer. I'm like, okay, if snowboarding is what I'm supposed to do, like, give me a sign. If it's not, then I've had a really fun year and I've got to go to Korea. I've got to meet a lot of cool people. And 2 days later, I got an email from the U.S. team congratulating me on making the national team. And so I did what any logical person would do. And I called the coach and said, hey, you accidentally added me on this email. And he said, we don't know what the funding is going to look like for you, but we've seen potential in your riding and we want to help support you and see where we can go and how we can grow you as a snowboarder. And I was so stoked. I was like, all right. So I quit my job as a nurse and I dedicated myself full time to snowboarding. And I had a couple wins here and there along the season. And they had thought that I could do well in border cross at the games because I have no fear and I lack this thing in my brain that tells me things are bad ideas. I'm just a full send kind of gal. But I ended up going down in border cross and I was so bummed because bank slalom is turning and that was not my jam. I could barely turn a snowboard to save my soul. And I remember just being so upset. And then the next day, I had to go back to like my why and my mission statement of why I was there. You know, I was there to show my nieces and nephew to chase their dream, no matter how crazy it is, and to be a good representation for my sport and my values and what I stand for. So I remember on the way to the bank slalom, it was like, wherever I place today, you know, let me be somewhere that I'm going to make a difference. If it's being the biggest cheerleader for everybody else, like, let me be a good positive impact for the sport and my country. And that day I had mental clarity that I've never had before. I wasn't thinking about the course. I was just super calm, had a really good headspace. And during my first run, the only time I thought of anything was coming out of the last turn. There was 2 rollers and I wanted to speed check or slow down, but I could see the finish line. And I was like, just get across the finish line, who cares? And I ended up crashing across the finish line on my face. I had road rash all over my chin, but I had crossed the finish line. And after everybody went, I was sitting in a 3rd place position with 2 more runs to go. And I remember going to the top and the coaches were like, yeah. They're like, wherever you finish today, they're like, this is what we saw in you. This is the potential that we knew you had. Like, even if you don't medal, you have accomplished so much. And that's probably one of my favorite moments of the games, was just how stoked they were. They're like, everybody up here was going nuts. They're like, it was crazy. And so going into the second run, I'm like, I'm holding on to this bronze medal. Like, I'm going to give it everything I have. And so I pulled back out of the start gate. Once again, that mental clarity, way wildly out of control. I don't know how I held on to not going through B-netting or catching an edge, but I crossed the finish line on my face, and I had shaved 5 seconds off from my first run. So that had put me in first place after the second run, and I was celebrating. And like my sister afterwards, she's like, why were you celebrating that second run so much? But there's a girl named Vivian, and she's a gold medalist. She's an incredible person, a great advocate for the sport, and just an amazing snowboarder. And for me, I was like, I'm close to Vivian. Like, this is like, that was a huge victory. And Vivian came down, put me in second. Lisa from the Netherlands came down, put me in third. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm still in medal position, you know? So pulling out of that last run, it was like, all right, all bets are off. Like, this is it. This is the last time you're going to pull out of the start gate. Like, make it count. So once again, came out of the last turn wildly out of control. The 2 rollers threw me off. Once again, I crashed through the finish line on my face, and I had shaved another second off. So I was at 59 seconds. And they put you in front of this big orange banner. And I'm like, okay, just let me stay in front of the banner, because that means I'm a medalist, you know. And the girls kept coming through. Vivian came through, put me in second place. But I was like, all right, I'm still in front of the orange banner, okay. And finally, the last person comes through, and Vivian turns to me and is like, congratulations. And I'm like, oh, everybody's done? And she's like, yeah. And I remember looking up at the Jumbotron, and I was in second place, and I lost it. I couldn't even get words out. I couldn't get anything out, except I was just screaming and jumping up and down, because I was in complete shock, just as much as I think everybody else on the circuit. We were all like, what happened? And so, yeah, it was just a super cool experience, you know. And I remember standing during the medal ceremony and just being fixated on my flag. And in my mind, it was like, I'm not just representing New Mexico, where I came from, or Colorado, where I considered my home, but I'm representing the whole US, you know. Like, how cool is that? And I still remember my flag. Like, I've never seen a flag more vivid. It just stood out. Like, the stars looked like they were in 3D, and the colors were just so bright. And it was one of the coolest, proudest moments to just sit there and watch your flag be raised.
That's a fantastic story, Brittani. And, you know, I must say, you've got a hell of a lot of resilience, because, you know, you all through your life, you seem to, like, regardless of being, you know, down and, you know, really, you know, kind of in that bottom place, you'll seem to find that kind of strength to carry on. And so no matter what puts you down, you'll always find a way. And I think that just shows, you know, there's so many inspirational people in the world that do that on a continuous basis every single day. Thinking about, obviously, you know, your story and, you know, snowboarding, because that's, you know, that's pivotal in your, you know, your life. Who inspired you and motivated you through snowboarding? And, you know, obviously Vicky inspired you to become a nurse, and obviously the other 2 ladies as well. But what really inspired you to push yourself to that extreme?
Well, like I said, I had a lot of problems with self-esteem and identity and my self-worth. And when I started snowboarding, there was a crew, you know, we were a crew in high school, and they were like the best snowboarders around in the Four Corners area. And I remember I was one of the only girls that would ride with them, because I was the only one that could keep up or hit the jumps. You know, I was not skilled enough to be doing that, but I would hit it. You know, if it was whatever it was, I would still try to tag along and go with them. And I just remember, like, they just accepted me no matter who I was or what my backstory was. And, you know, we had like our little, it was kind of like a roar on the hill. So if we saw somebody else that was part of our crew, we would kind of like holler out. And, you know, we were like a little posse, and it was really cool and special to me. And just watching them like flip and turn and rodeo and all that, it was incredible. And I remember my friend Matt, and he's like, oh, I bet we'll never see a girl do a 5. And so that was kind of like my life mission, was to be like, I bet I can do a 5. Like, I'm going to give it my all, you know? And so I was self-taught, so I would just like huck it and try to spit a 5 and just knuckle and hit, and, you know, but it was just a cool crew that we had. And it was a place where I felt like I had an identity, a positive identity.
That's amazing. I mean, you know, thinking about, obviously, you know, you're on the slope, and you know you're snowboarding, and going back to your time, obviously, in the Paralympics at 2018, and as you say in your blog, you know, face plant and silver medal. I mean, there must have been you know, what was the feeling like just before you actually started your launch?
Oh, it was a lot, because with our competitions, we normally don't have a huge fan base. And so when the person goes in front of you, like, I could hear the crowd roaring, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that must have been like the best time ever in recorded history, you know? And there's a camera in your face on a wand, and it follows you out as you pull out of the start gate, you know? So there was a lot of external stimulus, but I think like that day, I just had laser focus. I kind of let all of that stuff fade into the background, and I was just focused on my runs, because the day before, you know, 2 days before, I didn't have the performance I wanted. And so I wanted that day in the bank slalom, I was going to give it everything I had. I was going to be one of the fastest, or I was going to go through all the netting. And if I had to be heli lifted off the mountain, I didn't care. I had nothing to lose,
yeah.
You know, and I didn't have the fear of anything. And it was like, all bets are off. I'm putting it all out here today. And so, you know, people with nothing to lose are the scariest ones out there. So, you know.
You've obviously got no fear.
Yes.
And, you know, it's amazing testimony to, you know, how you live your life, but also, as I said before, that resilience to push yourself and break down those barriers to inclusion, diversity, and, you know, especially with awareness to disability, and nothing defines who you are and what you are, to be fair. You know, and obviously you're a nurse. I mean, what's it feel like to be a nurse now, and obviously through the last 18 months of COVID-19 and the pandemic, but where you are now?
I mean, either one of my jobs, I don't feel like I'm working. You know, there's so much gratification. I love being a nurse, and I love snowboarding. You know, I get to do two things that I really love as a profession. And, you know, I was snowboarding when the pandemic hit. We were in Norway. We had to come back to the States like pretty much immediately. And I just shifted my mindset. You know, it was like, now it's my turn to take care of my community. You know, this is my opportunity to help out those that need me, you know? And so I was in the COVID tents in 100-degree heat in full PPE in Utah, and, you know, swabbing people and trying to get their anxiety down. You know, everybody's afraid. We don't know what this virus is at this point, or, you know, the long-term effects. And the staff was tired and the people were scared. And so we just would turn the jams on, and we would try to make it like a little less scary. You know, if there's some Journey or some old classic jams playing and you're getting a COVID test and the people are happy and dancing around, I think it kind of took the mood from, I mean, not to take away from the seriousness of the pandemic, but sometimes you need that respite, you know, and sometimes you just need that breath of, like, it's going to be okay, we'll get through it, you know. And unfortunately, some people weren't able to get through it, but just trying to take the anxiety down. And even now on the floor, like, the COVID numbers are still high. We're still in it, you know. And so when I'm taking care of patients with COVID, it's just, you know, you're feeling a different role. And from my experience, you know, I know how hard it is to be in the hospital. It is on your family as well as it is on you as the patient. And so I kind of have a unique role because I know and I can connect with my patients on that level. And so we, as healthcare professionals, we assume the role of medical provider, caregiver, family member. You know, they're the one, you know, coping with the patients, but also talking to the family. You know, that was one of the hardest things during the pandemic, was there were no visitors in the hospital. and their families were getting terminal diagnoses. They were getting, they weren't understanding the verbiage that the doctors were saying because they were on medication. And so it was stressful. It was stressful for everybody involved. And, calling family members and having them just bawling and crying on the phone, it was tough. I worked Mother's Day, I worked Father's Day, I worked the 4th of July, and, people's loved ones are in the hospital, and they're relying on you for everything. We were kind of a lifeline for both, for the patients and their family. And I mean, I can't even imagine if my sister or my niece or nephew or my brother-in-law were in the hospital, I would have probably been one of the people that got arrested, because I don't know if anybody could have kept me from being there. And so I just empathize with everybody who had to go through that. And as a nurse, I just tried to step in and make sure that those needs were met by both the patient and their family.
Thank you, Brittani. I'm going to hand over to Owen now. Owen's got some questions for you. So, Owen, over to you.
Hi, Brittani. Pleasure to speak to you. I'm always interested in education around the world when we meet guests from all parts of the globe. So I'm also interested in the difference between your experience of education as a child without a disability, and then possibly your experience of sport and education having moved to para sport. So what was life like at school in terms of sport when you were growing up? And what's your experience of para sport in schools, or as we call it in England, SEND sport, so people with special needs and disabilities?
Yeah, so for me in school, I don't think I was really a jock. We always just played sports. I was homeschooled, and we played soccer and baseball. That was kind of what we would do for social activities. So I always played soccer, but I never loved it, but I played. And I remember during high school, I had a friend whose brother accidentally ran him over with a riding lawnmower and actually took his leg off below the knee. And he played soccer still with a prosthetic. And I just remember how cool that was. It was like, oh, dang, look at him go, And I think with the Paralympic movement and what's been going on in the recent years, I think there's a lot more awareness of how we are not limited just because of a limb difference or an amputation or something like that. And I think the world is becoming aware of that, of what we're capable and able to do as human beings, and I hate the word disability or disabled, my surgery, I call it re-abled me to be able to do what I was doing before. I don't know what it's like to live my whole life with a disability. I was able-bodied until I was 25, but, I do know what it's like to have a piece of me kind of taken away. And for me, it's been a huge mindset thing, if I set my mind to something, I can do it. And then transitioning to education after my amputation. So I went to nursing school as an amputee, and I remember I got my EMT basic, and I was like, I'm going to cut my leg off. And everybody was like, yeah, whatever. And I'm like, I swear, I am. And so I actually cut my leg off, and I didn't tell anybody. And then I showed up for an IV class over the summer, and my instructor went pale when he saw me because I was still on crutches. And I mean, it was kind of mean. I guess I should have prepped people and told them that I was actually cutting my leg off, because he was like in shock. But, and then I did my EMT intermediate before I went to nursing school too. And I mean, it's, I don't know, I don't view it as I'm different. And I think my mindset and kind of how I hold myself, people don't see it that way either. And in nursing school, we have to wear scrubs, right? And so when summer would come along during school, I'd have shorts on, and people would be like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot that you were an amputee. They're like, and now it's summer and you're wearing shorts, And so even now working as a nurse, people don't know that I'm an amputee. And then I'll wear the athletic fit scrubs, and they'll be able to see my foot, and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you were an amputee. And so I'm lucky enough to be below the knee with a mild impairment. Above the knee amputees call us paper cuts. So, I'm lucky that, my limitations aren't as severe as other, differences. But so I'm thankful for that. But, for me, I'm stubborn. And so if I set my mind to something, I'm going to get it done. You know, stubbornness is looked at as such a negative trait. Like you say, you're stubborn. People are like, oh, that's negative. That stubbornness has gotten me through a lot because I am stubborn as a ox. You know, if I put my foot down, I'm not doing it. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it no matter what, you know? And so, but I just think, I don't know, for anybody that's school age that's going to school right now, I just say, you know, hold your head up high, keep your esteem up high, just because you're different. We're all different, you know, as amputees or as people with disabilities, we wear it on the outside where people can see, but everybody has an amputation of some sort. You know, some people it's internal. Before I was a physical amputee, I was an emotional and a mental amputee. I had so many things in my life that were missing and weren't there and were taken away that, you know, that was harder for me to deal with and cope with than the physical amputation. And so, you know, just because you're different, we're all different. And I just, you know, the bullying and all of that is so bad, but you just got to keep your head up high, you know, don't let others. And that's what I've done. You know, I had a pretty abusive mother, and I was told that there was all kinds of things that I couldn't do. And I've proved her wrong in everything that she said a woman wasn't able to do. And so if somebody does say something negative or says you can't do something, prove them wrong. You're the only one that can set your limitations of what you're able to do and not able to do.
That's great. Well, we're taking part in the Marvel sponsored superhero series program. Thanks for wearing your Captain America top. That's great.
Yeah.
We've got hundreds of people here in Birmingham in the UK taking part in this at-home superhero and super try series. We've got at Clifton at my school, we've got 30 to 40 children with a variety of special needs taking part, and joining another 100 children at the school, because we're an inclusive school, mainstream school, in taking part in this event and trying to do as many kilometers in whatever way we can do using our super senses. You're such an inspirational woman with a great story. Would you have just a small message that we can play to the children and adults that are going to take part in this superhero series in the next coming weeks?
Yeah, like everybody's a superhero. We all have superpowers, you know. One power that we all possess is the power of togetherness and inclusion and, you know, smiling and loving each other. If you smile and you treat other people with respect and dignity, then, you know, you set the tone for the day. If you show up to school or work and you're happy and you're jazzed, which is usually how I am, I'm like, yeah, it's going to be a good day. Chances are it's going to be a good day. So, you know, wake up, set the tone, have a good day. Even if you're, you know, down a little bit, just amp the energy up. That's usually what I do. And it helps get through the day. And like I said before, don't let anybody set limitations on you. You're the only one that can tell you how far or what you're able to do. And you're the only one that can tell you what you can't do. If somebody tells you you can't do something, prove them wrong.
That's great. That's going to be played to hundreds of school children next week before they take part in the series. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Owen. So Brittani, obviously, you know, we talk about everything that you've achieved, but what for you, what really is your fondest achievement? Is you talk about everything that you've gone through, and you know, obviously the face plant and the silver medal, but what's your fondest achievement?
That's always a hard one to answer. You know, standing on a podium in the games, it's kind of hard to beat that, you know, especially because the coaches brought me on the team on coach's discretion. And then less than a year later, I was on a podium. And so for them to see that potential and me be able to rise to that occasion, I think is very special. That's definitely one of my top. And then graduating nursing school, you know, I was the first person in my family to go into the medical profession, and I graduated at the top of my class as my nursing class president. So, sport-wise, it was definitely the silver medal. Personal-wise, it was definitely becoming a nurse, and I'm thankful and lucky enough that I get to do both.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Obviously, you know, you talk about what you've been through and the resilience that you've shown, and you know, being a stubborn person and just going for it because you know that's what we're here to do and just push ourselves. You know, obviously we you know from our point of view in education and you know I work in a college for complex disabilities and lots of students, but thinking about obviously how do you on a daily basis, you know, you being positive all the time, how do you show that to others?
It's just the energy, you know what I mean? Like when I show up for a shift, it's like everybody's tired. It's a long day, you know, 12 hours is it's a long time, and it's physically demanding, it's emotionally demanding, and it's mentally demanding. But if I can show up and I'm like, yeah, 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 then the night shift that's going off or the day shift, they're like, they feel that energy and they kind of pick up on it. And then the day shift too, you know, so if I keep, you know, no matter what people say, if I keep trying to be positive, then it's contagious just as much as complaining is contagious. And so I'd rather people be stoked and happy. And I don't really care what people think of me. I think that's a big thing too, you know, like if you think me amping it up is stupid, then I don't care what you think. So, you know.
That leads nicely into obviously a last but one question. But yeah, obviously there's lots of people still struggling all over the world with the pandemic, and you know, key workers are doing a fantastic job all over the world as well. What would your message of motivation and inspiration for those people at this present time be?
I think it's just like we're all in this together. You know, COVID is one of those things that it's not just in the States. It's not just in the UK. It's not just in any continent. It's a global pandemic. And we have the option to make this something that unites us all and makes us all realize that at the end of the day, we're all human beings. You know, I may have an RN after my name or a medal after my name, but when you strip all of that away, we're all humans, and we're all on this earth to take care of each other, to unite with one another, to lift each other up, and to love each other. And I think, you know, we have that power to do it. It's just, we just have to figure out how to keep igniting this flame of positivity and try to extinguish all of the negativity that's going on. And, you know, that's been my main thing since the beginning. And even as a nurse too, like I talk to doctors just like that too. I'm like, what's up? And they're like, did you just say what's up to that doctor? And I'm like, yeah, he's a human or she's a human. I'm a human. We're taking care of humans. Like, I'm not going to change how I am based on who's around me. And I think that's important too, is kind of like find out who you are during this time. You know, it's a really good opportunity to kind of figure out who you are and how strong you are and how resilient you are, and setting goals for what you want to do. You know, that's kind of what I've done through this pandemic. And, you know, reaching out for mental health is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. This last year, I've done the same thing. I've been seeking mental health help because it's hard. It's hard for anybody. And so if we could view that as, you know, it takes a lot to reach out to another person and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, or this. But you know what? There's people that are there that'll listen, and there's people that are there that can give good guidance and help you get through whatever you're going through. And just because we're in isolation doesn't mean that you're alone. The greatest thing about this happening in the time that we are in is because we have things like Zoom and social media, and, you know, you're never really alone. And so if you are feeling alone, I just highly encourage you to reach out to somebody, reach out to anybody.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm going to start calling It's a Brittany because I think that's such a positive word. Before we finish, obviously, and our final question is, if you could think of a quote to support for motivation and inspiration, what would your quote be and why?
I think it's kind of what I've been reiterating this whole time. You know, you're the only one that can set limitations on yourself, and you're the only one that can achieve whatever your dream is. You know, don't let outside circumstances, people tell you what you're capable of and what you're not capable of. And it's true for me because it's something that I've lived. You know, from the time I was a small child, I was told that my mom never wanted girls. She only wanted boys. I was told that girls don't travel, girls don't go to school, girls don't compete competitively at an elite level. And if had I listened to that, even though it's coming from my mother, I wouldn't be where I am now. And so, you know, if I could have started that maybe at a younger age, it might be different. But snowboarding was that place and that escape that allowed me to change that mindset that you can't tell me what I can or can't do. Because I don't know. It's just something that rings true for me.
Brittani Coury, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. You are one of our best interviews yet. Just because you are Brittani, and that's the positive word of the day now. So you know, that has been, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Stay safe, take care, and I hope we talk again. And please, if you could send us a video to support our superhero teams in the UK and across the globe, more than welcome for you to, you know, have that message of positivity from Brittani. And if you'd like to take part in the superhero series, I can send you a pack as well, so to take part as well. So please let me know.
Yeah, let's do this.
And take care, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. It was so nice meeting and chatting with you both.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.